3 points of characterization. First of all, what does these jocks actually look like in media? It looks like people, for example, like Flash Thompson from, let's say, Spider-Man, or Brady from High School Musical. People who are shown to be popular in where they are. For example, in their schools, it's shown to be on top of the popularity hierarchy. All the girls on the cheerleading team wants to be their girlfriend, and they all fight to become that person. And these are also the same people who ends up bullying, let's say, like the nerds or people who just don't participate in sports. These are the people who are typically shown to be these like conflicted jocks in media. For example, like I mentioned, Flash Thompson, or let's say Dave Karofsky in Glee. And second point, characterization. In many storylines, what happens to these jocks is that they will discover this like softer side of themselves after like trampling over other people in general. And also like the reason why they have these characteristics put on them in the first place is to be used as like a punching bag for other people in the show itself. Third point of characterization then, because of this like strong macho imagery, this because of this strong like macho imagery that they try to portray, they tend to like hide this softer side of themselves from from their friends. So they never like openly like question their sexuality or try to be emotionally present in their relationships, and they just generally be like a poster child for like toxic masculinity, like always trying to be that person, always trying to be like the alpha male, that sort of thing. So fourth point of characterization, then why is this constantly used? Is because of the fact that this jock character is something that typically reflects the reality of like a lot of high school hierarchies in the first place, i.e., where you have like athletes at the top of the school reputation, at the top of the school hierarchy because they have a lot of reputation from representing the school. Then, first argumentation, then why is this so damaging? First of all, because this is something that platforms toxic masculinity. Three layers of analysis then. First, why is this toxic masculinity in the first place? Because number one, these jocks are shown to be people who engage in behaviors that like harm others, or they do this to like inflate their own ego, and these are also like characteristics that you have within toxic masculinity in the first place. That's to say that these are also people who are shown to be, let's say, like sexist. They see girls as like trophies, for example, and just not being in touch with their emotions in general. Then, so these are all things that, of course, are very harmful, things that are for toxic masculinity that we should not be promoting at all in the first place. Second layers of analysis, then why is it so bad then that we portray this thing as something within our media, specifically something that is shown to be characteristics of the popular kid within our media? Number one, because it shows that it portrays this idea to the younger generation that, hey, people with these set of characteristics are people who are at the top of the food chain in school. So it gives them this idea that, hey, if I were to be this person, if I were to like belittle people who are beneath me or who are supposedly beneath me, I'm able to attain the popularity that these jobs are shown to have then in the first place. So the reason why then that is so bad is that when you have young kids who are constantly consuming this like same media, this same message over and over again, that's why it ends up actually happening in high schools. That's why they end up emulating these jobs. Because they want to become popular, because it's just something that comes with puberty. You want to be popular, so you emulate the characteristics of people who you see to be popular then. So why then is that so bad then? Because third point of analysis, when you have these people trying to emulate the character of the job, it means that you just get a lot more people who are engaging in behaviors that that just harms other people, that being like bullying and so forth. It leads to a bunch of like negative impacts. Then a few impacts. Then two impacts here. First of all, it's about how this becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because sure, OO may claim to us that, hey, if this is the reality of like high schools, we should portray them in media. The reason why this is flawed is because of the fact that because you portray this in media and you portray this to be like what the popular kids do, then people are going to inevitably end up emulating said behavior. That's why in your high schools all over like America, or just high schools in general, you have people emulating this kind of behavior. You have people who continue to try to be like these jocks, and that's why these environments, not only do they propagate in schools, but media then sees that same environment in schools and like, oh, we need to portray that within our own media to try to keep up with the times or whatever. It means that you actually end up making this like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you get even more and more of this then at the end of the day. Second impact then is that how you platform and humanize this behavior then, because at the point at which you show these characters to have flaws, like, oh, they have a reason why they bully other people, why they do bad shit to other people in the first place, it makes people more inclined to believe that these behaviors that come with them are going to be like more justified then. That's to say, like, oh, if a kid were to get hit by his bully at school and were to go home and complain to their parents might say, oh, maybe that kid just simply had a bad a bad home life. That's to say, maybe their parents are arguing at home, for example. It makes these individuals seem more justified than they actually are. So not only are you promoting them, you're also humanizing them and making them seem more human and relatable to people, which means that they are more likely, which means that people are more likely to emulate these behaviors. Then, now before I move on to a bit of weighing, can I get something from CEO if possible? Three, two, one. Let's do a bit of weighing here. What if opposition tries to bring up to you this idea of like, oh, because we portray like these jokes in not social media, in media, we were able to give like these people like catharsis for because of the fact that, oh, I see myself within this character. I want to be like more like this character who maybe embraces the sexuality, for example. We tell them that number one, recognize that the people who are at the top of these popularity hierarchies in the first place are inherently a minority. That's to say that this is not something that is relatable to the vast majority of people. Then it means that for most people, this person is just seen as as like a bully who isn't redeemable to them at all in the first place. And also recognize the counterfactual that we will then run on government here. It means that in a world where you don't have this like troubled jock narrative happening in the first place, instead of these jocks having like some inherent reason for being like a bad person, instead of them being humanized for being a bad person, we just simply show them as they are within the stories. That's to say like, oh, these are people who are bad because they want to inflate their own egos and not because they have like something within them that should be then justified. It means that in our world, instead of having these people that are shown to be at the top of popularity hierarchies, what we will instead have is people who are like more positive role models. That's to say, people who will be shown to like, oh, this person is popular not because he's a bully, but because of the fact that he's really nice to other people and he's popular and people like him because of that. We're able to champion more responsible and more positive role models that will be consumed by younger generation. Then it means that we're able to make people more likely to emulate like these good person traits, and therefore because they want to be popular, and therefore you're able to get those benefits in our high schools. Then for all those reasons, OG.
Thanks, Emir, for that speech. You open up the hall bench. I invite you to the hall. Here.
Starting my speech in three, two, one. What government side tries to push is that being represented in media is the same thing as justifying for their actions. Understand that having represented in this form of social form of like media does not mean that you justify their action. It just means that you show that there is side of like humans as in general, that there is a bad side of them, there is a good side of them. They're not supposed to be seen as like inherently evil. This gives them the ability, or gives us the ability, to see like these tropes as humans. So a lot of the time, people get punished for something that's not really in their control. Having this trope being represented in media allows a direct translation to what they go through in their daily lives. In the real world itself, bullies like this exist. A lot of like bullies become bullies not because of like they're inherently like came out of the wound, decided to like, let's punch someone. It doesn't work that way. It works as in the way like, okay, they grown up in a pretty bad background. Their father cheats on their mother. They have like a terrible family background. This destroys like in like somebody's like person's perspective in the world. This could like make like someone feel like as conflicted as like, I don't know, like a bully, as a bully that they're like, as a bully that the media is already trying to represent in their group system. It's always because bully become bullies because of a certain issue that's not being inherently born within themselves. So why being represented in media is good is because what oftentimes is that it is likely on our side that we give you an actual platform that gives you the actual accurate portrayal of like what this trope looks like. People perceive bullies as bad and actively like with this form of narrative actively like pushes them back. Understand that this is already bad, considering that nobody is actually born like evil and whatnot. Everybody is born as human. Everybody is capable of being good and bad. So having this form of narrative being pushed back towards you or towards them is already impeding your form of like self assurance and self growth. Yeah.
So it's accurate that most of these bullies who engage in bad behavior and get popular in school
So basically, kids are going to think that if they engage in this type of behavior, they're most likely to be popular as well.
Okay, repeat the last part, but a bit slower.
So when kids engage in bad behavior that's accurately portrayed by these jocks, they are most likely going to be popular like them as well.
Not really, because understand that there is still other methods to be popular in high school. I don't see how being popular comes into this debate because understand that the whole trope is that it's about bullies, how they treat others, how it is seen as demonized or inhumane. So understand within the status quo that Goff is trying to push, instead of helping, you punish and dehumanize these people. Exactly what the POI was talking about. Understand that this is already dehumanizing in nature. It is not right to strip someone the ability to change. So they are not actually equipped to prepare for themselves like in the real world within of yourself. You don't expect someone in your work life to actually act like a bully, right? You ask someone in your work life to actually be professional, be prepared. This form of narrative or media shows them the ability to change, shows them the ability that, hey, although you're an bad guy for being a bully, but there is some form of like self-assurance, that there is some form of like self-growth within that form of like media, within the form of trope. So what are the impacts that is likely to happen on God's side is one, going to depression. Why is this going to happen? This is going to happen, likely to happen, because people most of the time wrongly characterize these people as bad. They see them as, yeah, you're just bad because you're just inherently bad. Understand that people are born inherently bad. So when this takes a turn, most of like these jobs or these people who are going through like tough times don't actually reach out for help. So this directly translates to self-impedance or like self-growth. So on my first argument, the idea that troubled jock is being represented in real life is actually like challengingly faced. What does this mean is because understand that back in the idea where these jocks are being like this trope of jocks are being like represented in social media, in media itself, they don't just show that, oh yeah, he's gonna punch this kid or this is gonna like I don't know, ruin this other guy's life, which is on like the most extreme cases. But what it turns is that, oh, give me a second. What it turns is that they show like actual mental health issues. They are actually raising awareness. They're like, or say this, they're like reforming this form of like mental health where they're like conforming to the idea where maybe it's okay that you're feeling this form of manner, but maybe acting out on those manner is not the right thing. Like, yeah.
Will these jobs be portrayed like in a positive light, or will they be shown as like villains within the story?
Understand that literally what I was talking about is that these portrayal of like jocks are going through tough times. They have mental health issues. They're not perfect. Understand that most people are not perfect. Having seen this like trope jocks are going through actual tough times shows the actual like humanization of like how these people are normal people like ourselves in our lives. What happens in turn, like what in turn happens after this is that this creates more awareness and actual help, which I'll go to my couple arguments like later on. So this creates a form of like self-neglect, which I mentioned previously about the portrayal of like these tropes. That form of like self-reassurance is not present within the status quo. This is already bad when you consider that these are the real things that real people go through in their everyday life. What makes this worse is that this form of narrative that jocks are bad is already being actively mitigated on Gulf side. But when this trope is being represented in media, which is what opposition is to actively pushing, you encourage university to take action. You encourage mental health institute to actually take action towards these people. Why is this true? It's because these people are already human themselves. They understand now that, and especially now that when this form of trope is now being represented in media, this gives them more incentive to actually push for this actual change. Argument number two, people like, or should I say troubled jobs are evolving and different around different regions. Understand that people are always changing. We are never the same person from 3 years old to let's say 15 or 25. There's always that form of redemption arc. Understand that these form of arcs that we go through in our life is very subjective and it is always changing time to time. So how do they change? This is important because everyday people, like everybody, deserves a second chance. Everybody who are like able to chat. Everybody who are able to change, Darkseid puts them in a blanket on this like form of trope that they can't change, that they are inhumane, they are so bad that they can't change. So understand the ego complex won't reach out for help, especially with the idea of ego complex. So these movies are like a way for like to say that these people can change. This gives them like a direct translation to their actual lives. So argument number three, why is banning already bad? Understand that this gives proper storytelling within the story. It makes everything seem like when you ban this form of like trope, this makes everything super like happy-go-lucky. Understand that the world is not rainbow and sunshine. There is like bad people out there. Like understand that those bad people are still human in the end of the day. So proud to propose.
Thanks to my speech to wrap up the OG. I invite you here.
This is a debate about assessing the impacts of this trope in our popular media. Media that is consumed by people all around the world that has subtle and very pernicious effects in mainstreaming and adopting values that we ought to uphold, which is why the popular media is often not just a reflection of society, but actively shapes their values as well. Our claim from opening government was that popular media is consumed by enough people to influence and mainstream attitudes and behavior. And we would rather not normalize attitudes of toxic masculinity, whatever or however it may have come about. Rather, we think it should be replaced by healthier depictions of masculinity. People who are in touch with their emotions, for example, who do not lash out violently at the slightest, attack at their ego, or however things like that. Like, for example, the counterfactual that we envision is like, I know this is not school, but Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings, a very healthy person who is comfortable in his masculinity. Or to some extent, Peter Parker from Spider-Man as well, who has much healthier emotional responses to the challenges that is faced in life. These are not perfect people, but we do not glorify the kind of toxic behavior that they have. What do we hear from opening opposition? The crux of the case that comes from OO is basically to suggest that these trouble jocks come from very damaged backgrounds, like their father was drunk and abusive or whatever, and therefore this somehow justifies the kind of behavior and the way they treat other people in our society today. And I think that in all fairness to them, it's probably true, like your trauma does affect who you are, but we think that the way it is presented in popular media is problematic. These are people who are often glorified as athletes who are seen as the popular kids in school. These are often people that engage in bullying other people below the social hierarchy, who see women as sex objects and can just like switch between them because women also see this athlete as like the star person to be with. And all of this just creates this cult of personality around this trouble job that makes it very, very socially rewarding for you to be this kind of person. And I think that's just not something that we want to normalize in our society. Two responses. The first thing is that they claim this is going to raise awareness about this problem, and therefore people are going to do something about it. But the first thing to know is that it is just deeply unclear how these jobs can change for the better, and the opening opposition does not ever illustrate the pathway as to how, during the storyline of this popular media, this person or this troubled job can realize that they were a bad person, turn over a new leaf, and then become better. And I think that if you take examples like Flash Thompson from Spider-Man, for example, he never decided to change, and at the end of the movie, he was thrown into some place where some alien ate him and it became venom at the end of the day. So it's just not clear how things get better. The second is that I think that toxicity is still expressed on their side of the house. In the best case where they can assume that some awareness is raised, I think the fact that toxicity is glorified and socially rewarded means that children and people in our society are more likely to default to those kinds of negative behaviors because they see it as socially rewarding rather than to change and adopt something different. I think it's just very, very difficult for you to emulate something that you do not see. It is much easier for you to default to behavior that has been normalized in mainstream in society. The third response I'm going to explain in constructive, why in the best case where this person can change for the better, this actually does impose an incredibly undue burden on everyone around them, and how that's just incredibly unfair. So at the top of this, at this point in the round, opening government is ahead because we win by showing a world where more positive values are mainstream and normalized, and we raise a healthier generation that is less abusive, more emotionally available, and stuff like that. I just think it is deeply unlikely for the awareness on that side to materialize in positive outcomes. We would much prefer having positive role modeling in the first place. Before I go on, is there a POI from anyone? Yes?
These bullies normally depicted as the villains.
So the definition of the troubled jock as portrayed in the info slide is this guy who is a popular rugby athlete and is glorified for doing things like that. And I think in some cases they are portrayed and bullied, and that's probably bad. But I do think that the greater overarching point we're trying to make is that platforming these kinds of negative behaviors cause people to subconsciously embody them, whether they agree with those things or not. And the same is true for platforming positive behaviors, people subconsciously embodying them. That's a better society that we want to live in. Let's talk about constructive material. I want to look at So we have explored why all these kinds of behavior are just terrible. We don't want it in society. I want to talk about everyone else around this troubled job. Because if it is true that this person is cast as a sympathetic villain, as the way the opening option described, they're abused at home, they have a drunk father, like no one likes them or whatever, then it is also true that in this story, in the best case where they kind of interact with other people and try to change for the better, there is a disproportionate amount of emotional labor that is placed on everyone around them to take care of this person and to try to let them improve. And more often than not, this usually comes down to women, right? And normalizes the very dangerous narrative of taking abuse because it's not his fault. He couldn't help it. He had a traumatic childhood. I think this is the kind of negative behavior and the expectation that we place on women, the system, and everyone around this person to deal with it because it wasn't his fault at the end of the day. Like, you place the burden on them to deal with it, to not have any issue with it, be them to support this troubled job through their journey of self-inspection, and forgive this person at the end of the entire day. And I think this normalizes a very dangerous expectation on the victims of abuse to put up with abuse because the abusers were also past victims of abuse themselves, to fix their abusers and then to forgive them. This is wrong for three reasons. The first is that it is just morally wrong for you to expect victims to take care of their abusers and to put up with this for no fault of their own. But the second is that there's just very little accountability for this troubled job at the end of the day. The best case scenario for that side of the house is that this job apologizes at the end of the movie. Most of the time, we don't ever see that. And at that point, the harm has already been done. I'm not sure what the apology does for that. But the third and most pernicious harm for this entire narrative is that this doesn't happen in real life. So if we put this expectation on someone to deal with an abusive person or someone with like very bad attitude, there's no incentive for that person to change. Women enter into abusive relationships to think that they can change him for the better, and they try their best to change him. But because they keep giving chances to the guy just takes advantage of it and continues being a horrible person for the rest of the for a very long period of time. I think that this expectation normalizes a cycle of abuse, puts many vulnerable people, especially women, in positions where they could be abused and potentially suffer physical and emotional harm. And this is just not something that we want to support. On a comparative, again, we would much rather platform a trope or a role model that is more in touch with their feelings, who is less toxic in terms of a masculine person, and who is directly held accountable in cases where they do mess up. Very, very proud.
Thanks, Nico, for the speech. And wrap up the opening half and invite your
I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think society itself, when we talk about troubled jocks, oftentimes we look and portray them as somewhat of a bad people, but rather we don't see them as part of a human being that we are able to resolve certain issues that is out there within society. Right? Few layers and extensions, right? Firstly, the idea of OG talks to us about how a positive role model will now somewhat be more likely in the art world. We tell you why this is not likely to happen. Number one is the point in which movie companies oftentimes want a lot of these viewerships to happen, and a lot of this viewership only happens through this drama that exists within this toxic masculinity that is there, right? We tell you that why this is better, right? Because of the amount of viewership that you gain towards this toxic masculinity or this troubled jocks personality, we know that these troubled jocks are then now having some form of issues that is there within the end of the day. And understand that movies still don't want to be held accountable towards certain form of actions of these troubled jocks. So more often or not, towards the end of the story, you'll see these troubled jocks change, or how they have changed, or how they have paid their repayment towards their victim within the long run. Right? So all of this now, all of this now tells you that, look, if I am more likely a troubled jock, which means that these are the signs of being a troubled jock, which means that more likely or not there are some form of awareness campaign that is existing out there to be able to tell the people that, look, these are form of signs that you need to look for. These are the awareness that is already existing, right? As opposed to having a full on positive worldwide, which means that you're telling people that you're basically sugarcoating certain stories and telling people that, oh, a lot of this real life scenario or a lot of this real life application do not exist in the real world. And in fact, when they come encounter towards a troubled job, they don't necessarily go ahead and report them, or they don't necessarily they don't necessarily go and deal on with that issue. Rather, they just hide it and allow the perpetrator to get away with it, right? Whereas on this form of movies, you can see that these perpetrators always usually pay for their actions within the long run, right? Number two is the idea on something that CEO CPOI Fitz just now, is the idea that how are these kids more likely to differentiate between reality and the media, right? The problem here is that a lot of the media is over exaggerated. In reality, we have a lot of check and balances that exist to prevent you from doing that toxic and abusive behavior, right? The point in which where you bully someone in school more likely means that you'll get oftentimes punished by your teachers in the long run. These are all laws that are already existing in status quo that do not allow you to go into the extreme, or in fact, if you still continuously goes on and bully, that's when you get sent to the counseling. You'll be dealt with the issue effectively, right? So we tell you that this itself will not happen in the first place, right? So the idea of positive reinforcement that OG wants to talk to you about, we tell you that a lot of this positive reinforcement can happen in a lot of other forms of ways, not necessarily towards this form of media that is already existing. Like, this looks like itself like your religions itself constantly telling you to be good to people and to do good, therefore you get that form of good deed that is existing. This looks like your parents constantly telling you do not bully someone, or suddenly help others or help the poor in of itself. This form of stuff already exists within status quo, and I think that form of positive reinforcement does not necessarily mean that it has to come out from the media in the first place. But why itself on the comparative that troubled jocks itself has to come out as a sort of a role model within the media? Few layers to this. The first layer is the idea that most of these trouble jokes, we have to understand that there's a certain issue that is already existing within status quo. That means most of this happens within athletes or within athletes within the sports industry, which tells you that hey, I'm the big muscular guy, but at the same time I'm having issues with that form of sexuality. This form of stuff existing in status quo and that needs to be addressed and solved within the long run. Yeah.
So let's say that the jock in your world is portrayed as a bully because of his traumatic past. What does this movie teach people about processing the trauma and moving forward being healthier?
I think a lot of these movies then itself tells you that a lot of these jobs then itself seek the form of help that is there within the movie itself, right? It tells you that it is okay for you to go out and help, right? Because a lot of these bullies in real life have this form of ego issues where the point in which where they seek for help or tells you that, oh, I'm going to therapy, is when you see yourself being weak within society itself. A lot of this movie tells you that it's okay for you to go to therapy. It's okay for you to get that help that is needed from this movie, right? I think this is what a lot of the bigger producers push forward also in today's world, right? So moving on to the second layer is the fact that a lot of these trouble jocks now have the idea on when they can have themselves redeemed towards it, and shows that, okay, I have paid forward for my actions that I have done within the movie, and therefore now I am seen to be as a good person, right? Because understand that not a lot of these people within real life, they don't see where the second chance is coming from, and we think that in this movie it is better off properly portrayed to tell you that a lot of this you can still reach out for help. You still reach out for help. Society is still there when you need them to, when they are there, right? So these movies like are a way to say that people themselves can also change, and a lot of these people really do deserve a second chance in the first place. Yeah, sure. Because this is this is exclusive because due to the very fact that this is exclusive due to the very fact that a lot of these trouble jocks that we see in real life are oftentimes being punished for their behaviors and being punished towards their action instead of dealing with the problem that is already existing from the very root, right? So the point in which where you bully someone, oftentimes you don't see what caused that person to bully someone. More oftentimes you punish them and you constantly give them a punishment proportionate towards their action, right? So the point in which that's when they no longer trust people and society in general. You just push them away back into the shadows instead of getting the very help that they very need in the first place. Lastly, is the idea that why an offside, the point in which where you don't have this form of trouble job, you lose out to that form of viewership that's already going to be existing, because now you would have to skew around the storyline to make the story even more entertaining in order for you to garner more viewers. We tell you that, look, even if it's so exaggerated of these trouble jobs, you still get that form of viewership, and that form of viewership then translate into awareness that can be translated into real life gains that helps you, that helps institution and school to look out for certain characteristics and help this trouble job within the first place, right? So it's the whole idea itself that tells you that it prepares you for what you're about to expect in university or in things in real life. To tell you that a lot of this stuff is it's not it's not as happy and positive. You're not going to find as much positive role model, because in this world it's more of a competition on who gets better, and who gets better and who gets above, right? So few things we solve on OO is the fact that how do we able to stop bullying, how are we able to help the bully innovate itself, and how we are able to change the society's perception of bullying, and why kids itself won't necessarily just go around posing bad behavior in the long run. Thank you.
Thanks, Nico, for that speech. To open up the closing half, I invite Member of God.
Yeah, can I speak in this volume? I want to quickly deal with the OO case. Three things. Number one, not all portrayal that exists is necessarily good portrayal. Therefore, if you have limited portrayal, especially for people of marginalized communities, of sexual minorities, or gender minorities, we think you need to maximize the positive portrayal in order to empower those specific communities. So OO then needs to learn how a counterfactual specifically works, because they can't just say, oh, positive portrayals aren't going to be sensationalized. If you bar out all of these negative portrayals, then we think that uniquely you have those positive portrayals. Secondly, I need this OO to understand that there are other avenues of understanding bullies. You have other avenues of understanding people that come from abusive households. You have education in school. You have media constantly propagating this, not in the form of pop culture and not in the form of these jocks, but rather that you still have other mechanisms in order to do so. So their case was inherently not exclusive to begin with. People know that these individuals struggle, but what happens on opposition then is that you allow them this permissive mechanism for them to continue their behavior, or you allow them to continue on their facade. Certainly then, nowhere in the info slide says that there will be change for these individuals. They try to claim that, oh, you need it for the storyline, and that's why these individuals are likely to change in the long term. But what you need to understand as well is that they are still allowed and still permissible for them to act in that way for the majority of the show itself. That is why not necessarily you would have this change. But then I need to question again, why was this exclusive and needed to be portrayed by individuals, and why did you need them to have this marginalized identity? Because you could always have this in other avenues. You could always understand that bullies have some form of background that made them create this behavior. But rather you needed those minorities to be protected because that was uniquely the only platforming that they had to begin with. Moving on then, the way I weigh over OGs in terms of the three substantive I have, in terms of why I want to weigh on marginalized groups, because I think opening mainly focus on the fact of how bullies are able to change or not. So the first thing then is in terms of why this feeds into discriminatory narratives. Three layers towards this argument then. Firstly, I agree that with opening that these shows create a lot of reactions. They create a lot of ripple effects. OO concedes towards this and actually rants about this a lot in LO. Notice that the people that are likely to take advantage of this are likely right-wing conservatives, people that want to further discriminate against these groups. Because when pop culture propagates this media, this is when specifically those groups are able to use it as ammunition to further target these groups. We think that these are the most vulnerable groups. If you want to look at the metric of vulnerability, we think we win on this as well, because we are able to protect these groups on our side of the house. The second layer here then is when these groups are likely to attack innocent individuals. This is when they get no protection. When you're individuals that just want to be themselves aren't able to protect themselves because they always have this trouble like view that is imposed on them. Because these people, no matter what, even if it directly aligns with what they are acting as, these minorities in school are as, they are still going to impose this on them. You are going to view all of them as harmful towards their children. You're going to see right-wing conservatives in the United States telling their own child that this person in your class is gay and therefore they are going to bully you. All this means you're going to further alienate these individuals because you have this media constantly portrayed. Thirdly, then on the comparative, then we get better representation on our side. I think that's inherently intuitive. This is exclusive towards CG because you're able to get better representation for the minority groups themselves. You're able to have positive portrayals. You are able to portray the internal struggles of these individuals rather than them actually like unable to come out or things like that for the discrimination that they face, rather than them being at the top of their school hierarchy, rather than them being the bully. Therefore, you are unable to allow these like conservative narratives to further propagate on their side of the house. What we aren't able on our side of the house, I want to make this clear. The burden was not that we need to tear down discrimination as a whole, but rather we did not provide further ammunition for these groups to actually propagate these forms of ammunition. This is what opposition is allowing on their side of the house. I think closing has to do with this then. Moving on to the second substantive then is that social perceptions propagated by the media actually harm these communities in themselves. I have 4 layers of analysis towards this argument. The first is in terms of how these individuals are going to be defined by the portrayal in media in of itself. The reason for this is the lack of representation I've already talked about, but also the availability bias that is always going towards desensationalized media, as OO also concedes to, and as the opening half concedes to. So while you're not involved in this part, if you're not the trope in of yourself, you're still able to, like, the sensationalization is going to increase the portrayal, and therefore it creates this ripple effect on society that actually affects the way you are viewed in school. So this innocent kid in school is therefore also, if they have the same minority identity as these troubled jocks, therefore you're going to have the same view imposed on them. But even then, let's look at the second scenario. You're also, for those that are able to actually have a false sense of acceptance towards like their troubled jock identity, where they're further enabled to actually propagate this stereotype. Let's move on to the second then on terms of like mechanizing the harms. That there's two scenarios. Number one is that you're going to be ostracized, or rather that you aren't able to actually fully live up to your identity because you're always being discriminated, or rather that this is what people view you as now, and you're ostracized from actually accepting your own identity. Because what comes from a lot of marginalized groups, or people that come from abusive households, they're unable to actually accept who they are themselves. But the worst outcome then is when you actually buy into this and you actually enable this behavior because you think that you can actually climb up the social ladder. I think the only way for closing to opposition bench to actually tear this out is to actually prove to me when necessarily that change would actually happen. When these individuals can see on these shows themselves, they're constantly going to be on top of the school hierarchy. Why is this something that they needed to change in the very first place if they wanted acceptance, if they knew that they wouldn't get acceptance if they did change their behavior? Certainly that this is when you have a constant cycle where you hinder the ability of individuals to change, because you can always keep in that certain bubble, you can always keep on that facade. This is bad for two things. Number one is that you create a larger ripple effect or domino effect for more people to actually be enabled like this. Or secondly, you are locked out from your from like, ever accepting your own identity. Before I move on, anything. PR. 3, 2, 1. Lastly, on a comparative then, we are able to get more accepting portrayals there, but additionally, we think on opposition, you actually have the inability to hold media accountable for actual change to actually happen. This is when you get lessening positive portrayals, and this is when media is going to be full of these forms of sensationalized portrayals that opposition bents wants to stand for. Last extension then is in terms of how this diminishes the self-worth of individuals in these communities, whether you come from abusive households or you come from marginalized communities or those like stated in the info slide. 3 layers. Number one, you are further invalidated, and we think this is already harmful on an internal level. That it's always okay to hide behind a facade and persona. Secondly, the purpose of representation in the very first place was to able to enable these communities to further mobilize. When you have limited airtime, when you have limited media portrayal, you need to maximize its capacity. Lastly, then, we think on opposition bench, this hinders the first level of mobilization for marginalized groups. You always needed the most powerful apparatus, for in this case, pop culture as a tool in the toolbox to actually enable people on the ground before you can actually mobilize into things that are larger. Therefore, the winning metric on closing then is that we are able to mobilize these people rather than letting them continue this trouble job trope.
Let's think about a speech look of people and here.
I think we can all agree it's kind of intuitive that throughout the decades of movies and TV shows being made, this sort of messaging has evolved to the fact that they don't glorify the actions that these bullies do, and they say that yes, these bullies are bad and they are villains. There's a reason we call these troubled jocks a trope, because of the way we receive the messaging was also different. Because we could just laugh at 90s bullies, for example, telling people that this is just ridiculous. People don't do this stuff in real life. The fact that we view and analyze these characters, for example, just so far as go to making think pieces and discussions about these people, if anything, we often realize that these sort of troubled jocks are a reflection of real life circumstances and settings in which people actually go through, and how they manifest into shaping you as an individual and how you are as a character, right? You as a person. But before that, just a quick rebuttal on what TG tried to say. They said that like queer people will more alienated because of the fact that they are portrayed as bullies and stuff. Here's a couple of rebuttals to that. Firstly, internal struggles and conflicts that you aren't able to resolve within yourself do cause you to feel frustrated, and they do cause you to lash out. We think that this is reasonable so far as characterizing these people, and it's reflective of your life. But secondly, just don't be a bully. If you are a bully and you are gay, I probably don't really care that you're gay, more to the fact that you're a bully. If you don't bully these kids, you'll probably be fine.
and you probably do deserve to be ostracized if you still bully kids. But thirdly, they wanted to like take it a step further and talk about how conservatives will propagate this narrative that gay people are bad, the fact that they bully kids. I don't think they need a reason, right? For the most part, they've already hated the gays. They've already hate any like portrayal of gay people in media. They don't need this person to be like a gay person. In fact, we should push for more like proper portrayals and representative of people who are probably struggling with their identity, who don't take like lash out on people. But like, why don't we regret this sort of thing? Because we believe that this has sort of defined this sort of archetype, right? The fact that how we see these sort of characters, and we think this is something that CEO brings uniquely to the debate. What do we tell you? We tell you that these sort of tropes helps how it this sort of writing evolves for these sort of people. Like, let me just get through this, right? 3 things in my speech. Number 1, why isn't it as harmful as government are trying to say? Because for the most part, and especially in modern day, it's a harmless trope. But secondly, I think it's most people's first introduction to sort of complexities of a character and things like how it could be deeper than just black and white. But thirdly, how this kinds of plants the seeds of like reformation and rehabilitation for people who actually need it. Let me get through this one by one. Number 1, as far as how it's just a harmless trope for the most part. At worst, we can see that these tropes are just really bad cliches. They could probably make you roll your eyes. You don't think that these troubled jocks are like someone that deserves all or anything, right? If you were watching these movies as a form of escapism, or even if you wanted to embody these characters in the first place, 4 things here. Number 1, most of the time, you watching the movie aren't the bully. You aren't portrayed as the bully because you're the main character who probably often do get bullied. The fact that they have interactions or altercations with these bullies makes it so that they're depicted as evil. They're depicted as the villain of the story, as I said in my POI. If anything, there's like this sort of like disconnect with the bully in itself because they're not the character that you're trying to relate to when you want to watch the movie. There's like a common something that happens that these bullies don't remember the people they used to bully when they were back in high school. And this happens in real life. Like distancing yourself from the bully and making it so that you can see the impacts of how they bully the main character, the trauma and maybe the things that this main character has to go through makes you so far removed from the bully that you don't want to try to embody them at all. But secondly, these movies don't ever glorify the bully insofar as they actually get a happy ending or they're a good person. Sure, they're good at sports, but that's as far as it, right? It makes it clear that they are bad so far as they actually still bully the main character and keeps harming them. And like the only thing they have over the main character is probably they're popular. But thirdly, these bullies are punished in these movies. Something bad happens. Like at the very end, like the main character always wins. These bullies don't get what they want. The main character does have a choice. Like sometimes they forgive the bully and sometimes they don't. But at the end of the day, right, what I'm trying to say is that these tropes are probably like washed down to being harmless for the most part. If anything, it makes you more aware of these sort of tropes because people are probably now aware enough to know that they are a good person at heart isn't always the case. You don't become a prom queen overnight. You go to school or campus and people like there's no one is the job, right? You know that these are tropes, so you kind of start to boil these like tropes down to an archetype. The fact that like bullying, just because they bully doesn't give them a pass to be forgiven, and they're always the character in the media. None of this. Then moving on to my horizontal extension, and this is where I get into like the evolution of character writing, so to speak. These troubled jock archetypes or tropes kind of derives from like how you would write a villain, right? Where someone does something bad, but it's for a reason, or it's because they're broken, or because they have like this some sort of like incentive to do so. In most popular media, these sort of troubled jock tropes, it's I would say like one of the pioneers of this sort of character writing because it's most people's first introductions to like maybe a more complex character other than the main character. It allows you to sort of understand this character in the depth that you otherwise wouldn't because of the fact that you realize these issues reflect in real life. These issues that reflect in real life are not always one-dimensional. They're not always black and white, as you would think. Like you would think so, right? People face problems early on in their life, and that's what makes you the trouble jock in the first place. The fact that you grow up in these broken households, the fact that we were unlucky enough to get like a friend that's a bad influence, for example. And for a lot of people, media is where people sort of start to develop this sort of understanding from. And this answers CJ's question: why media? Why not anything else? Because this is media. It's the most accessible and most easy thing to understand for most people. You watch movies as a kid. You start to read books as a kid.
Yeah, so even if you can show these tropes, but even if your tropes tell people what not to do, it doesn't tell you what to do, right? How you talk about trauma, how you be vulnerable. That's why OG prefers a positive representation of masculinity from the get-go to shape these attitudes and norms.
Here's the thing, these movies are just to tell you that these people are bad. If you want to like find solutions, you probably don't want to do it in a movie. You want to go out and talk to people around you. You want to go to counseling or you want to talk to a therapist. But even then, if you yourself somehow see your character in the troubled jock, you're privy to how the story unfolds. You're privy to how whatever these jocks face in that, how like what the people these jocks bully go through, how it affected the main character and the drama that they had to go through. I think it sort of teaches you to not make the same mistakes the bully did, and if anything, that I see this as a win. But thirdly, how it starts to plant the seeds of rehabilitation slash reformation. The fact that we see people like drug addicts, for example, that come from a broken background, it isn't impossible to recover for these people. And this is the sort of understanding that starts to allow for compassion in the first place. This understanding is the reason why centers and shelters exist for these people, why there's an incentive to make rehabilitation centers. Because in absence of the trope, I think this sort of compassion would be slightly less. It will probably still happen, but probably is like much slower and at a much smaller scale. If anything, this sort of trope, as I said before, kind of defines the archetype of this character, and it kind of makes you understand that life isn't one-dimensional and your issues aren't always as simple as black and white. Thank you.
Thanks, Nico, for the speech. To wrap it up,
Sorry, give me a few seconds. Let me just. Is it okay if I speak at this volume? Okay, cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. It's funny how No House in this debate actually explains what are the implications of this whole model on people who are marginalized, people who are actively being attacked, and people who are attacked by right-wing rhetoric that's actively being empowered by what Alicia tells you, by how these things actively empower these things further and justifies it. Here's the thing. Throughout the last speech that we've heard zero engagement as to why these things are still justified in the first place. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to first deal with OG. Secondly, I'm going to deal with OO and CO collectively, since their whole model was basically just derivative of their case. Therefore, CO in itself cannot already place over OO. Firstly, then on OG. Firstly, I'm going to explain as to why we did OG. 3 parts. 1, because of the fact that only on our side of the house, we explain to you why kids aren't likely to see these jobs that have a soft spot. Because the fact is, there's no validation of these behaviors in the first place. Shame that they are shame is that it's the fact that the shame that of these activities are actively being instilled, and these soft spots should be hidden. That's being portrayed in this media that shows you that these traits are inherently going to be something that's negative. Secondly, we fully explain to you humanization and what are the impacts of it being justified, which we had not heard anyone map this out at all. Alicia tells that to you about her speech as to why the humanization of this is inherently going to be harmful, and how it justifies the most egregious of actions in order to further allow for these bullies to further bully people. Thirdly, we explain to you what when representation, like we explain to you what representation has when it comes to the implications of society as a whole. When these negative media are actively being portrayed as a whole, where queer people or men who are significantly more feminine than other men are most likely going to be engaged with these activities in order to prove their own worth and in order to be seen as hopeful or something, we show you as to how this harms society as a whole, and how this harms the identity of these marginalized groups. And we explain to you as to why this is exclusive on our case as a whole. Insofar as no one in this debate has ever touched on this, we think that CG already places over most of the houses in this debate. Firstly, that this debate is also about marginalized groups. What does CG then bring to you that is exclusively to us and can be weighed over OG? Few things. One, on marginalized groups. We explained to you about how OG feeds into discriminatory messages because people can use this in media in order to further exacerbate the harms on these groups and justify the actions that they are subjected to. This further alienates these individuals, as per Alicia's speech, as per how she explains to you about how these things happen in the first place, and they basically get far worse representation when it comes to our side, their side of house. What then do we bring to you is the impact on our side of house. We get far better representation for minority groups since we opt for alternative media in order to represent these people as a whole, in order to represent these bullies and these jocks. We don't always have to subject to popular media with other choices. None of the teams in this house proves to us why this was the only alternative that we could propose to, but rather on our side of house, we prove to you that other alternatives are in fact viable. Secondly, people buy into this rhetoric that this allows them to climb up the hierarchy. That means that children are going to buy into this rhetoric and think that, aha, being a jock means that I'm able to be at the top of the school, that I'm able to be popular, that I'm able to have the validation that I never gotten as a quiet kid. This means that children are much more likely in order to buy into these things and start being bullies because of the fact that this portrayal shows to you that when they opt into being jocks, when they opt into being bullies, they're more likely in order to have the validation that their soft side can never be shown due to the fact that when they show it, they're going to be bullied, they're going to be alienated, and they're going to be entrenched. Thirdly, this diminishes their self-worth. Listen, it further invalidates these people by allowing them to link this behavior to certain traits. That means that this allows for such a lot worse alienation and a lot worse demonization when it comes to right-wing rhetoric, as per Alicia explains to you. Now, let me deal with both OO and CO as collective, since CO is basically just derivative of OO. Firstly, on OO, they brought to us a few claims. Firstly, that they brought to us a few claims that representation isn't always justification, and bullies become bullies for a reason, and there's accurate portrayal on their side of the house. Here's the thing, Alicia explains to you that there's already so many ways in order to portray these incidents, and the problem is that the other measures actually do exist, and they fail to prove to you as to why these things are exclusive in the first place, which hinders their path to victory, since they are none at all. But here's the thing, on the accurate portrayal part, if what they say is true, and this is portrayed at a very accurate rate, it actually goes against their case. Since that actively strengthens our case as to if the portrayal were to be so accurate, that means that right-wing populists can use this rhetoric in order to further prove to you as to why jocks are bad. Jocks who have queer traits or have more feminine traits are bad. That means that this media is actively able to be used as demonization material and actively being able to further empower right-wing rhetoric. Therefore, the right-wing rhetoric by anti-marginalized groups actually increases, and they cannot explain when they do not explain as to why kids are less likely to scrutinize on this media as whole. Therefore, popular media and toxicity will still be expressed. Yeah, that's right. Then we get another three things. One is that we get under max impact on on mental health as to why that exists on their side of the house. The second one, people change. Here's the thing. They do not prove to us as to why this was exclusive on their side of the house. But insofar there was zero engagement as to our harms, we think that they strategically cannot win this debate as whole already. But here's the thing. People already get punished for having marginal traits. Fear-mongering of how having marginal traits will still exist on their side of the house. That means that queer people and men who are significantly more feminine are going to be scared of being able to portray their traits due to the fact that these people are actively being bullied in these movies, due to the fact that they feel the need in order to cover in their little shell in order to stay safe and not get bullied, due to the fact that they have to be a jock in order to be able to be popular in school. These were the things that existed on their side of the house that we received zero engagement on. Why then do we weigh over both sides of the house? That one, because it proves to you that these things aren't exclusive to them. We have the same mechanisms in order to put in place. We have the same alternatives. The difference is we do not need the same exclusive fact as to why we have to resort to popular media in order for good portrayal. But on our side of the house, we win against them because there was zero engagement on our harms on marginalized groups push, and therefore throughout this debate, only on CG do we prove to you as to why marginalized groups actually get far more, and it isn't only just about students, it isn't only just about kids, it's about whole communities that actively get attacked by these popular medias, and right-wing rhetorics are able to harm these people further.
Thank you for that speech and all speakers for your speeches. This is going to mark. Wait. Hey, the position of the sub. Okay. To have the off bench, I invite the off bench. Here.
Speech in 3, 2, 1. Acknowledging that abusers, bad people, are also victims of certain circumstances is one of the main contributions that comes from CO that I don't think it's properly tackled by especially CG. Furthermore, because of the intricate issues that exist in real life, it is important to have a lot of different representation and different depictions of these certain issues. And this is why we don't regret the portrayal of this like trouble jock, because it encouraged more different portrayal, especially towards issues, and not make issues simply in black and white. Now, two things: rebuttal and clashes. Now, first rebuttal, something that came very strong from CG is the idea that because of this portrayal, it further harms marginalized communities such as queer people and like gay people and feminine people because of this bad representation. We need to understand that in the info slide itself, it doesn't just mention marginalized community. It also mention people who are abused in their household, which does not apply specifically for one like sexuality. It applies for a lot of people, and simply do not want to portray like any like anything bad about this. Doesn't want to portray why certain bullies becomes like that. You don't actually like explain a lot of issues in media. But furthermore, like, even if you say that it is to stop right wing ideas. Number one, previous speaker has told you that right wing conservative will hate on especially marginalized community regardless if they portray good or badly. Therefore, it's still symmetrical. But number two, even if you want pure good representation, then you only create a situation where these victims of their own circumstances, such as household abuse, only as certain way that these people who are abused in their own household can be depicted as trouble in a certain sense, or that gay people itself cannot this one like paragon of pureness and innocent. They are not trouble in any way. This itself is bad because you harm a lot of other people who actually suffer from this, like being abused in their household. And furthermore, you don't actually want to help them because you think, oh, this person is like a bully. And therefore, there's no point in trying to reform them because obviously they don't suffer anything at home, right? Before moving on to my second battle, yes? CG.
So is it then okay to excuse the guy who beat you up because he couldn't possibly come from an abusive household?
Yeah. Okay. In response to that, even in my previous speaker said, these bullies inside this the trouble jock trope. There's a reason why there's the word trouble. These jocks are not glorified, even if they are popular. We even like for example the musical header. The popular kids are very bad people. You and I who consume them know that these popular kids are bad people. But that does not mean that you won't want to be like that. Instead, it's a cautionary tale to not be like that. Like, even if you suffer, and especially under our side, that even if you suffer through this certain abuse, certain troubles, it's not an excuse for you to be like that. But instead, it's a cautionary tale for you to learn. And like, this also like kind of relate with another rebuttal towards like the whole Gov saying that only good depiction should be allowed because then people would want to follow like this toxic masculinity because they're popular. But this does ignore the inherent fact of this characterization that they are completely problematic characters in the first place. They are trouble to talk in the first place. They are trouble because they are purposely like villainized by the narrative. The narrative does not support them in any way. Though I don't clear how any benefits from them could like appear, especially when you they decide to play it clean and do not want to actually acknowledge and talk about complex issues such as household abuse or queerness that can like cause someone to be evil and something like that. Okay, now, yeah.
The problem with your explanation of this sympathetic villain is that it also normalizes a narrative of forcing victims to put up with their abusers and to deal with them. Isn't this unfair?
Yes, this is kind of unfair, but most of the problem stems from the writer's inability to actually make a proper storyline where these bullies are not forgiven and such. But also other stories where these bullies are, even though they receive redemption, they are not given forgiveness or by the victim. However, whether or not if it's a good depiction or bad depiction, it's important for this depiction to happen in the first place. Because then it leads to my first clash, which is reformation. Because under their side, understand that both their arguments does not give an avenue or does not give a hope that people who suffer some things, who are bad people in general, but viewed by society as bad, they don't offer any hope for them to actually change. Instead, they only push them away because they see, because there's no because in media they're always villains. Villains will exist regardless in media. So an addition of this trope doesn't harm much, except just bringing up the hope that people can change, that there is a redemption, which is uniquely at our side. Because even though they, as opening opposition, told you that change and reformation can happen, we told you that reformation under our side exists because these issues are portrayed complexly. Like you represent this issue in a way that you do not glorify certain marginalized community and such, which leads to my next clash. Which side provides a better awareness? Now, this is where we differ with OG because with OO, because although they talk about awareness, we talk to you that awareness not simply that these people are suffering to some things, but also as a cautionary tale that bad things in society happen always for a reason. Not everything in life, not every people in life are bad because they are naturally bad, naturally evil. A lot of times in society itself, people do bad things because they are affected by abuse, affected by abuse and the such. And furthermore, like they don't even give their side don't even talk about awareness, because how can you know that these certain bullies or like how victims of domestic abuse or the victims of like a lot of abuse or about their own insecurity, they don't talk about it because they only see that these victims can only be seen as a certain way. However, under our side, we give awareness not only because number one, there's always exists in status quo like good narratives of these people, of these communities who are marginalized and abused and such. But also, we also give you other alternatives on what this marginalized community would look like. Therefore, we give you a far other form of awareness in which we give advice that victims can exist in all different forms. And it's important for us to actually acknowledge that, because on the their side, they don't acknowledge that. So, with all that being said, I think go to side closing out.
Alright, let's pick up on the speech in all speakers versus